Chapter 1. The Language Hijackers. Trick 1. The Presupposition Stack. Think about the last time someone asked you, "Why do you always do that?" Seems like a straightforward question, right? But notice what's already embedded in there. Always. That word isn't neutral. It's not gathering information. It's asserting a pattern. Before you've even answered, before you've had a chance to think about whether you actually do always do that thing, you're already defending yourself against the assumption that you do. That's called a presupposition stack. It's when someone embeds assumptions inside their questions or statements. And while you're busy responding to the surface content, your mind is quietly accepting the hidden premise as fact. Salespeople do this constantly. They'll ask, which premium package works better for your budget? Notice what they're not asking. They're not asking whether you want a package at all. That decision has already been made for you, tucked inside the structure of the question. Now you're just choosing between options within their framework. Or think about a doctor's office. You come in for a routine checkup, and the doctor says, "How long have you been experiencing these symptoms?" You might not have mentioned any symptoms. You came in feeling fine. But suddenly you're rifling through your memory, wondering if maybe you have been experiencing something, because the question presupposes that you have. This technique is rooted in something called conversational implicature. Basically, the hidden assumptions we make to keep conversations flowing. We're hardwired to accept certain premises to stay socially cooperative. Someone asks a question, we answer it. We don't usually stop to interrogate whether the question itself is valid. Embedded commands work the same way. In Ericksonian hypnosis, therapists learned they could slip suggestions into innocent-sounding sentences. I wonder how quickly you'll notice yourself relaxing. Isn't a command, grammatically, but your brain processes it as one. It presupposes you will relax, you will notice it. It's just a question of when. So how do you defend against this? You have to develop the habit of rewinding. When you feel suddenly cornered, when you're defending yourself against something you don't remember agreeing to, pause. Mentally replay the conversation. What premise did they sneak in? What are they treating as already decided? And then, this is the important part, you name it. Hold on. I'm not sure I always do that. Can you give me a specific example? Or, actually, I haven't decided whether I'm buying anything yet. Let's start there. The moment you pull the hidden assumption into the light, it loses its power. Trick 2. Strategic ambiguity. Now let's talk about vagueness. Because sometimes, the manipulation isn't about what someone says. It's about what they very carefully don't say. Think about fortune tellers. They're masters of this. They'll tell you something like, "I sense you've experienced a significant loss recently. Someone important to you." And you think, "Oh my God, yes. My grandmother died last year." Or maybe your childhood dog. Or maybe a friendship ended. Or you lost a job. Here's the thing. Everyone has experienced loss. The statement is technically true for literally anyone. But your brain doesn't process it that way. Your brain immediately reaches for the most emotionally salient loss in your recent memory and thinks, they knew. They saw something. That's strategic ambiguity. It's deliberately vague language designed to let you fill in the blanks with your own meaning, and then feel like the other person provided that meaning. You see this everywhere once you start looking for it. Job interviews. We're looking for someone who really gets our culture. What does that mean? Nothing specific. But you'll project your ideal version of workplace culture onto that blank space and think, yes, that's me. I get it. You've made their vague requirement meaningful, and now you're trying to match something that was never actually defined. Dating profiles do this constantly. I need someone who understands me. What does understanding mean? How is it demonstrated? The vagueness is the point. It sounds profound. It feels meaningful. But it's empty enough that anyone reading it can imagine themselves as that person. Advertising lives here too. Clinically tested ingredients. Tested for what? Safety? Effectiveness? By whom? In what kind of study? The phrase gives you the emotional reassurance of science without any of the actual information. It's the Barnum effect in action, named after P.T. Barnum, the showman who understood that people will accept vague statements as personally meaningful. This works because our brains are meaning-making machines. We can't tolerate ambiguity very well. When we encounter something vague, we compulsively fill it in. We create coherence where none exists. And whoever provided that vague framework gets credit for the meaning we generated ourselves. The defense? When something sounds profound, but you can't actually explain what it means, that's your red flag. Ask for specifics. What specifically does getting the culture look like? How would I know if I'm understanding you correctly? Force the vagueness into clarity. Watch how often people can actually answer. Trick 3. The linguistic power shift. Here's a sentence. Mistakes were made. And here's another. I made mistakes. Same factual content. Completely different psychological impact. The first one, mistakes were made, is passive voice. No subject. Mistakes just happened. They materialized out of thin air, apparently. No one made them. No one is responsible. They simply were. This is called the linguistic power shift, and it's one of the most subtle ways people dodge accountability while technically telling the truth. Corporations are experts at this. Changes will be implemented. Who decided on these changes? Who benefits? The passive construction erases agency. It makes decisions sound inevitable, like forces of nature, rather than choices made by specific people with specific interests. Politicians love it too. Jobs were lost. Really? Jobs didn't wander off on their own. Someone fired 10,000 people. But phrasing it passively diffuses responsibility, makes it sound like an unfortunate circumstance rather than a decision. You see it in relationships constantly. Things fell apart. Whose actions caused them to fall apart? We've grown distant. Who stopped making effort? The passive voice turns actions into states of being, choices into circumstances. Even customer service scripts are designed this way. Your call is important to us. Us. Who is us? It's a faceless corporate entity. No individual is claiming responsibility for whether your call actually gets answered or your problem gets solved. This matters because agency, who did what, is central to accountability. When language obscures agency, it obscures responsibility. And when responsibility is obscured, change becomes impossible. You can't address a problem if you can't identify who's causing it. So start watching for passive constructions, especially around negative events. Notice when subjects disappear from sentences. Notice when things just happen rather than being done by someone. And in your own life, when someone uses passive voice to describe something they did, translate it back. Things fell apart becomes, what specifically did you do that contributed to things falling apart? Make the agency visible again. Trick 4. The false binary. Either you trust me completely, or you don't trust me at all. How many times have you heard some version of that? In relationships, in workplaces, in political discourse. This absolute, all-or-nothing framing that takes the infinite spectrum of human experience and jams it into two boxes. This is the false binary, and it's everywhere. You're either with us or against us. Really? What about being with you on some things and not others? What about having a more nuanced position? The binary erases all that complexity. It forces you to choose between two extremes, when the reality probably lives in the vast middle ground that's being hidden from you. Salespeople use this constantly. Do you want the red one or the blue one? That question assumes you want one. It's moved past whether you're buying anything at all. Now you're just choosing which option within their framework. Neither isn't presented as a possibility. In workplaces, either you're committed to this company or you're looking for the exit. What about being a competent professional who does good work without making the company your entire identity? That option has been erased. You're being forced to choose between total devotion and betrayal. This technique is related to what psychologists call dichotomous thinking or splitting. It's a cognitive distortion where everything gets divided into absolute categories. All good or all bad, complete success or total failure, perfect trust or complete suspicion. And it's effective because when someone presents you with two options, your brain often treats those as the only options. You start weighing red versus blue, when the real question should be whether you want either. The defense is simple but requires practice. When you're presented with a binary, name the missing middle. What other options exist? Insert the nuance that's being deliberately removed. I trust you in some areas based on your track record there. In other areas, trust needs to be earned. That's how trust actually works. Refuse the false choice. There are always more than two options. Trick 5. Euphemistic redefinition. Let me ask you something. Does collateral damage sound better or worse than we killed civilians? Same event, radically different emotional impact. That's euphemistic redefinition. It's replacing accurate, descriptive language with sanitized versions that make unpalatable things feel acceptable. The military pioneered this. Collateral damage doesn't make you picture children. Neutralize the target doesn't make you think about a human being dying. The language is designed to create emotional distance from the reality of the action. Corporations do it constantly. Right-sizing. They're not laying people off, destroying livelihoods, creating financial chaos for families. They're right-sizing. It sounds almost positive, doesn't it? Like they're optimizing something, getting the size right. Real estate agents are masters of this. Cozy means too small to turn around in. Vintage charm means you'll be renovating for the next decade. Up-and-coming neighborhood means it's currently not great, but they're hoping you won't notice. And tech companies, don't even get me started. Content moderation or censorship? Same action, completely different framing, depending on who's describing it and what they want you to feel about it. This works because of linguistic relativity, the idea that language shapes thought. When we change the words, we change the emotional and cognitive associations. We change how people feel about the same facts. The pattern to watch for: when the language seems specifically designed to make you feel differently about something without changing the underlying reality. When words seem chosen for their emotional impact rather than their descriptive accuracy. And here's what you do. Translate it back. When someone says right-sizing, mentally replace it with firing people. When they say enhanced interrogation, think torture. Strip away the euphemism and look at the actual thing being described. Don't let pretty language hide ugly reality. Trick 6. The semantic stretch. And finally, let's talk about how words drift. Think about the phrase team player. 10 years ago at your company, it probably meant someone who collaborates well, shares credit, helps colleagues. Pretty straightforward. But watch what happens over time. Slowly, quietly, team player starts to mean someone who never says no, who works unpaid overtime without complaint, who doesn't push back on unreasonable deadlines. The definition stretches, little by little, until it means something completely different from where it started. That's the semantic stretch. The gradual expansion of a term until it encompasses things it was never meant to include. You see this in relationships too. Support starts as emotional presence, showing up for someone, being in their corner. But over months or years, it can stretch to mean agree with everything I say. Never challenge me. Put my needs first always. Same word, completely transformed meaning. Marketing has rendered some words almost meaningless through this process. Natural on food labels used to mean something. Now it's legally almost meaningless, applied to products that are anything but. The word got stretched so far it snapped. Or think about how trauma has expanded in social discourse. It used to refer to specific, clinically significant experiences, PTSD-level events. Now it's stretched to include any uncomfortable experience. That's not to say discomfort doesn't matter, but when the same word covers everything from combat experience to someone disagreeing with you online, it's lost its definitional power. This concept is called semantic drift or linguistic inflation. The psychologist Nick Haslam documented something he calls concept creep, the way psychological concepts expand their boundaries over time to include more and more experiences. Why does this matter? Because once a word has been stretched beyond recognition, it can be weaponized. Someone can call you not a team player, and you have no defense, because the term no longer means anything specific. It means whatever they need it to mean in that moment. The defense: periodically define your terms explicitly, especially in important relationships and agreements. When you say support, what specifically does that mean to you? What behaviors demonstrate it? Lock down the definition before it can drift. Don't let words become whatever someone needs them to be to win an argument. Chapter 2. Emotional Engineering. Trick 7. The Manufactured Nostalgia. You know what's interesting about memory? It's not a recording. It's a reconstruction. Every time you remember something, you're not playing back a video file. You're rebuilding it from fragments, and those fragments get colored by your current emotional state, your current needs, your current story about who you are. And some people have learned to exploit that. Think about the last time someone said to you, "Remember how good things used to be?" Maybe it was a partner talking about the early days of your relationship. Maybe it was a manager talking about the old days at the company. Maybe it was a political slogan promising to restore some golden era. Here's the question nobody asks. Were things actually better? Or are you remembering a highlight reel? This is manufactured nostalgia, and it's one of the most effective emotional manipulation techniques out there because nostalgia isn't just a feeling, it's a drug. Research shows that nostalgia literally reduces your perception of physical pain. It makes you more generous with your resources. It lowers your critical thinking. It makes you want to spend money, give trust, go along with things you'd normally question. Marketers have known this for decades. That's why Coca-Cola periodically brings back throwback packaging, making you think the product was somehow better in 1985. It wasn't. The formula is the same or similar. But that vintage can trigger something in you, a longing for a simpler time, a better time, even if that time was never actually as simple or as good as you remember. Political campaigns weaponize this constantly. Make America great again. Take back control. When exactly was it greater? Greater for whom? The slogan doesn't specify because it doesn't need to. You fill in your own idealized past. You project your own golden age onto that blank screen. And suddenly you're voting based on a past that might never have existed. In relationships, this shows up when things are struggling in the present. Remember how good things used to be between us? And sure, maybe the first few months were easier. But were they actually better? Or were you just in the honeymoon phase when you didn't know each other well enough to have real conflicts yet? The question selectively highlights the good parts and erases why things changed. Often because real intimacy requires navigating real differences, and that's harder work. Workplaces do this too, especially management resisting necessary changes. Back when people really cared about their work, implying that newer, younger employees don't care as much. But what they're actually nostalgic for is probably a time when workers had less power, fewer options, and couldn't push back on unreasonable demands. The good old days were good for management. Were they good for you? This works because of something psychologists call rosy retrospection bias. We naturally remember the past more positively than it actually was. The sharp edges get smoothed. The difficulties fade. The good moments become more vivid. It's adaptive in some ways. It keeps us from being paralyzed by past pain. But it makes us vulnerable to manipulation. So when someone invokes nostalgia to influence your present behavior, pause. Ask yourself, is this memory accurate, or am I being shown a carefully edited version? What am I forgetting about why things changed? And most importantly, whose interests does this nostalgia serve? Trick 8. Strategic vulnerability display. Now let's talk about something that feels completely opposite to manipulation, vulnerability. We're told vulnerability is the path to authentic connection, right? And it can be. Genuine vulnerability, shared at appropriate stages of a relationship, builds real intimacy. But here's the thing. Some people have learned to weaponize it. Imagine you're at a car dealership. You're negotiating price, holding firm on your budget. And suddenly the salesman gets personal. Look, I really shouldn't tell you this, but I need this sale for my quota. I'm going through a rough time. If I don't hit my numbers this month, I don't know what I'm going to do. What just happened? He shared something vulnerable, something personal. And now you feel responsible, somehow. Like you're not just buying a car, you're helping this person. The negotiation has transformed from a business transaction into a personal obligation. That's strategic vulnerability display. It's calculated sharing of weakness or struggle, timed and deployed to create obligation, lower your defenses, or manipulate your perception of the relationship. You see this in early-stage dating a lot. Someone shares intense personal trauma on the first or second date. Deep stuff, childhood wounds, past betrayals, significant pain. And it creates this illusion of immediate intimacy. You feel special because they're trusting you with this. You feel obligated to stay because leaving now would mean abandoning them in their vulnerability. But genuine vulnerability develops over time, as trust is earned. When someone leads with their deepest wounds before knowing you, that's not intimacy. It's a manipulation tactic, whether conscious or not. Workplaces do this too. Your manager shares a personal struggle, sick family member, financial stress, relationship problems, right before asking you to meet an unreasonable deadline or take on extra work. The vulnerability creates a sense of alliance. How can you say no when they're going through so much? Their personal struggle becomes leverage. And social media influencers have turned this into an art form. Watch the timing. Vulnerability posts often coincide with product launches. I've been struggling with my mental health, and that's why self-care is so important to me. Speaking of which, use code VULNERABLE20 for 20% off my wellness line. The research here connects to self-disclosure reciprocity. When someone shares something personal, we feel compelled to reciprocate, to match their vulnerability. It's also related to the pratfall effect, where strategic displays of imperfection actually increase likability. We trust people who seem flawed, human, real. But here's how you distinguish strategic vulnerability from authentic connection. Look at the timing. Look at whether it serves their agenda. And most importantly, look at whether the vulnerability always leads to an ask. Genuine vulnerability is offered freely, without expectation of specific return. Strategic vulnerability is a transaction dressed up as trust. Trick 9, the empathy hijack. Here's a scenario. You're having a disagreement with your partner. You're calm. You're explaining your perspective clearly. And they say, "Why are you so angry right now?" And suddenly, you're questioning yourself. Am I angry? I didn't think I was angry. But they see anger, so maybe I'm angrier than I realize. Maybe I'm not perceiving my own emotions correctly. That's the empathy hijack. It's when someone describes their own feelings, usually discomfort or threat, as if they're objective observations about your emotional state. And it works because we're surprisingly uncertain about our own emotions. We look to other people to help us interpret our internal experience. Think about a workplace scenario. You're managing your workload fine. Then your boss says, "You look really stressed and overwhelmed lately." Before you can even respond, they follow up with, "I'm worried about you taking on this new project. Maybe we should give it to someone else." Two things just happened. First, they planted the idea that you're not managing well. Second, they used that planted idea to justify not giving you opportunities. You walked into that conversation confident in your capabilities. You're walking out wondering if maybe you are overwhelmed and maybe you aren't ready for more responsibility. Parents and authority figures use this constantly with children. A kid is legitimately upset about something. Maybe a sibling broke their toy. Maybe they're frustrated with homework. And the parent says, "I can see you're getting tired and cranky. It's time for bed." The child's real emotion, anger, frustration, gets relabeled as tiredness. Over time, this teaches the child not to trust their own emotional experience. And then there's the classic manipulation version. You're being too sensitive. You've expressed that something hurt you. Instead of addressing their behavior, they reframe it as your perceptual problem. They're not hurtful. You're just too sensitive. Your emotional reality gets invalidated and replaced with their interpretation. This technique is rooted in research on affect labeling and emotional contagion. When someone names an emotion, it actually changes how we experience it. And we're deeply social creatures. We use other people's faces, tones, and descriptions to calibrate our own emotional understanding, especially in ambiguous situations. The defense here is crucial. Trust your internal experience. Especially notice when someone names your emotions right before dismissing your concerns. That's not empathy. That's hijacking empathy's language to serve their purpose. If someone tells you what you're feeling, check in with yourself first. Are they describing your experience, or are they describing their discomfort with your experience? Trick 10. Intermittent reinforcement. Let me tell you about the most powerful conditioning schedule ever discovered. B.F. Skinner figured this out with pigeons. He put them in boxes and taught them to peck a button for food. When he gave them food every single time they pecked, they learned the behavior. But when he stopped giving food, they stopped pecking pretty quickly. But then he tried something different. He gave them food randomly, sometimes after 2 pecks, sometimes after 50, sometimes after 5, unpredictably. And those pigeons? They became obsessed. They pecked compulsively, frantically, long after the food stopped coming entirely. That's called intermittent reinforcement or variable ratio scheduling. And it doesn't just work on pigeons. Think about slot machines. You don't win every time you pull the lever. You'd quit immediately if you did, because you'd know the exact value exchange. But you win sometimes, unpredictably, just often enough to keep you pulling that lever, convinced the big payout is just one more try away. Casinos have built empires on this psychological principle. Now think about a relationship where your partner is sometimes incredibly attentive, affectionate, present, everything you want. And then sometimes they're cold, distant, unavailable, and you have no idea why. You can't predict when you'll get the warmth and when you'll get the distance. That unpredictability doesn't make you give up. It makes you obsessive. You analyze every interaction, trying to figure out the pattern, trying to figure out how to get the good version of them to stay. That's intermittent reinforcement in action. And when it's deployed deliberately, when someone consciously withholds consistent response to create dependency, it's one of the darkest manipulation tactics there is. Workplaces do this too. A boss who occasionally praises you effusively, makes you feel seen, valued, important, but usually ignores your contributions entirely. Those occasional hits of recognition feel extraordinary because they're rare. You find yourself working harder and harder, not for consistent appreciation, but chasing that unpredictable moment when they'll notice you again. Social media platforms have engineered this into their core functionality. Likes and comments don't come predictably. Sometimes your post gets dozens of responses. Sometimes it gets none, and you have no idea why. So you keep posting, keep checking, keep refreshing, because the reward might be there this time. The unpredictability creates compulsive behavior. The research is unambiguous. Variable ratio schedules create the strongest, most extinction-resistant behaviors. Behavior learned this way is incredibly hard to unlearn because your brain is always thinking, maybe this time, maybe the next one. Here's what you need to watch for. Notice when you're trying harder for someone who's less consistent. Notice when you're more obsessed with someone who's unpredictable than someone who's reliably present. That's not you being drawn to their authenticity. That's your brain responding to a powerful conditioning schedule. Healthy relationships, healthy workplaces, healthy dynamics involve consistency. Not perfection. Nobody can be perfectly consistent, but a baseline of reliability. When someone is deliberately unpredictable to keep you off balance and focused on them, that's not mystery. That's manipulation. Trick 11. The emotional labor extraction. Here's something we don't talk about enough. Emotional labor is real labor. Managing your own emotions is work. Managing someone else's emotions, soothing them, anticipating their needs, maintaining their equilibrium, is even more work. And some people treat other people's emotional regulation capacity like an unlimited resource they're entitled to extract. Think about the phrase, "If you loved me, you'd know what I need without me telling you." Sounds romantic, right? It's not. It's a demand for mind reading. It makes you responsible for managing their emotional state without giving you the information you'd need to actually do it. You're set up to fail, and that failure becomes evidence that you don't care enough. In workplaces, this often flows downward through hierarchy. A boss who processes their stress by venting to subordinates, who are required to remain supportive, engaged, empathetic, essentially performing unpaid therapy. You can't set boundaries because they're your boss. You can't be unavailable for their emotional needs. So you absorb their anxiety, validate their frustrations, help them regulate, and then you still have to do your actual job. Friendships can fall into this pattern too. You have a friend who only calls during crises. They need support, processing, someone to talk them through their latest drama. And you show up, you listen, you help. But when you're going through something, they're busy. They don't ask how you are. The emotional labor flows in one direction only. Or family dynamics, where everyone has to manage one person's emotions. Don't upset your father. Why is it everyone else's job to regulate his emotions? Why isn't it his job to manage his own responses? But the entire household organizes itself around his emotional state. walking on eggshells, managing their own behavior to prevent his outbursts. This concept comes from Arlie Hochschild's research on emotional labor, originally about service workers who have to manage their displayed emotions as part of their job, flight attendants smiling through abuse, for instance. But it applies to invisible labor in relationships too. The work of monitoring someone else's emotional state, anticipating their needs, smoothing over tensions, maintaining connection, it's exhausting, and it's often completely unrecognized. And there's a gendered component here that we can't ignore. This kind of emotional labor is disproportionately expected from women, who are socialized to be empathetic, nurturing, endlessly available for others' emotional needs. The cost is real. Empathy fatigue is a documented phenomenon. You can run out of capacity to care, not because you're a bad person, but because the resource has been extracted from you without replenishment. So what do? You start recognizing emotional labor as labor. You notice when you're doing the work of managing someone else's emotions for them. And you start asking yourself, is this reciprocal? Do they show up for my emotions the way I show up for theirs? Or am I functioning as an unpaid emotional support system? You're allowed to say, I don't have the capacity to process this with you right now. You're allowed to expect adults to manage their own emotional states. Caring about someone doesn't mean unlimited availability for their emotional needs. Trick 12. The preemptive apology deflection. Here's something subtle that happens in the aftermath of harm. Someone does something significant, betrays your trust, violates a boundary, causes real damage. And then they apologize. But notice what they apologize for. I'm sorry I didn't text you back quickly enough. I should have communicated better. Wait, they didn't just fail to text back. They betrayed your trust in a major way. But the apology addresses texting. It takes the form of accountability while avoiding its substance entirely. This is the preemptive apology deflection. Apologize for something minor to avoid dealing with something major. Or apologize in a way that makes further discussions seem petty, like you're the one being unreasonable by not accepting their apology. Public figures do this constantly. I'm sorry if anyone felt uncomfortable. 3 problems with this sentence. First, if. That questions whether discomfort even happened. Second, apologizing for feelings, not for actions. They're not sorry for what they did. They're sorry you had a reaction. Third, anyone, which is vague and impersonal, avoiding specific accountability. Compare that to, I'm sorry I said that. It was hurtful and inappropriate, and I take full responsibility. See the difference? One accepts accountability for specific actions. The other performs contrition while avoiding accountability. Or think about a friend who forgets your birthday entirely. When you bring it up, they apologize profusely for being 5 minutes late to lunch last week. They focus all their apologetic energy on something trivial to avoid addressing the thing that actually hurt you. Relationships do this constantly after major violations. Instead of addressing the infidelity, the betrayal, the pattern of behavior, they apologize for not being a better communicator or getting defensive when you brought it up. The apology is technically happening, but it's aimed at the wrong target. The linguistic markers matter here. Listen for, I'm sorry you felt, instead of I'm sorry I did. The first makes your feelings the problem. The second takes ownership of their actions. Listen for if inserted into apologies. I'm sorry if I hurt you. The if questions your reality. Either they hurt you or they didn't. They should know. Listen for vagueness. I'm sorry for everything. Everything what? Name the specific harm. Vague apologies avoid accountability. This technique is about performing contrition without providing actual accountability. It looks like they're taking responsibility. It can even feel like closure in the moment. But later, you realize nothing actually got resolved. The real issue was never addressed. The function is to make you feel like further conversation would be petty. They apologized, right? What more do you want? Well, you want them to apologize for the right thing. You want them to understand what they actually did. You want accountability for the actual harm. Real apologies name specific actions, acknowledge specific impact, and take full responsibility without hedging. Anything less is deflection dressed up as contrition. Trick 13. Manufactured scarcity of affection. And finally, Let's talk about how some people turn basic kindness into a commodity. Think about someone in your life, maybe someone you're dating, maybe a parent, maybe a manager, where you feel like you're constantly working for their warmth. Their affection, their approval, their basic positive attention feels rare and precious. When you get it, it feels amazing. When you don't, you wonder what you did wrong and how to earn it back. That's manufactured scarcity of affection. It's deliberately withholding warmth, approval, or attention to increase its perceived value and increase your efforts to obtain it. This is the scarcity principle, the same thing that makes limited edition products sell better, applied to emotional resources. When something is scarce, we value it more highly. When someone's kindness is rare, we work harder for it. Dating dynamics often fall into this pattern. Someone is intensely affectionate one day, completely distant the next, and you can't figure out the pattern. Are they interested or not? The uncertainty, the hot and cold behavior, keeps you off balance. You find yourself pursuing them more when they're cold, trying to recapture that warmth you know they're capable of. Parenting can operate this way too, and it's particularly damaging. Conditional love, warmth only when the child performs correctly, behaves properly, achieves the right things. The message is, my love has to be earned. It's not baseline, it's not guaranteed. You only get it when you meet my standards. Friendships can have this dynamic. Someone who's consistently hard to reach, making their time seem more valuable than yours. When they do show up, it feels special because it's rare. But over time, you realize you're always the one initiating, always the one working for the friendship, and they're always the scarce resource. Workplaces absolutely deploy this. A manager who rarely gives positive feedback makes any praise feel extraordinary. You find yourself working unreasonably hard just to get basic recognition, because when it does come, it feels like winning the lottery. This connects back to intermittent reinforcement. It's the same psychological mechanism. But there's a crucial distinction. This is different from natural variation in mood or availability. Everyone has good days and bad days. Everyone has times of greater or lesser emotional bandwidth. Strategic withholding is different. It's a pattern. It's consistent inconsistency. And it serves a purpose, keeping you focused on earning what should be baseline. Because here's the thing. Basic kindness, basic respect, basic warmth, these aren't prizes. They're not rewards for good behavior. They're the foundation of healthy relationships. When you find yourself treating someone's basic decency like a rare gift, something's wrong. Healthy relationships have a baseline of warmth and regard. Certainly, there's variation, extra affection during good times, maybe some distance during stress. But you're not constantly wondering if they care, constantly working to earn basic positive attention. If someone's affection feels like you're working for scraps, pay attention to that feeling. You're not needy for wanting consistency. You're not demanding for expecting baseline kindness. You're recognizing manufactured scarcity for what it is. Chapter 3. Identity Manipulation. Trick 14. The Forced Choice Identity. Let me ask you a question, and I want you to notice what happens in your mind when I ask it. Are you the kind of person who values quality, or are you the kind who just looks at price? Did you feel that pull? That slight pressure to choose one, to identify yourself as one type of person or the other, even though I gave you a false choice. As if those are the only two types of people, as if you can't value both quality and responsible spending. That's the forced choice identity. It's offering you a choice between two identities, both of which serve the manipulator's purpose, so any choice you make confirms their frame. Salespeople are masters of this. Are you the kind of person who values quality or the kind who just looks at price? If you say quality, they justify the premium product. If you say price, they've got a value package that's still more than you intended to spend. Either way, you're buying. The choice isn't buy or don't buy. That question's already been decided for you. You're just choosing which identity to inhabit while buying. Relationships deploy this constantly. Are you someone who fights for what matters? Or someone who gives up? Sounds like they're asking about your character, your values. But both options mean the same thing. Do what they want. Fight for what matters, which they've defined as staying in the relationship on their terms. Or give up, which makes you weak in your own eyes. Either identity leads to the same outcome, compliance. Workplaces love this one. Are you a team player, or are you just here for yourself? Team player sounds positive, right? But in this context, team player is code for does whatever I ask without pushback. If you say you're a team player, you've just agreed to compliance. If you say anything else, you've identified yourself as selfish. The actual alternative, being a professional who collaborates effectively while maintaining appropriate boundaries, has been erased from the options. Parents use this on children all the time. Are you a big kid who can handle this? Or are you a baby? The child wants to be a big kid. So they agree to whatever this is, going to bed without complaint, not crying when hurt, taking on something they're not ready for. Either identity achieves compliance. The option to be a child with legitimate needs has disappeared. This technique works because of something called self-perception theory. We have a deep psychological need to be consistent with how we define ourselves. Once you've claimed an identity, even in response to a manipulative question, you feel pressure to act in accordance with that identity. You've told yourself a story about who you are, and now you have to live it. The research on forced compliance shows this too. When people are cornered into making choices that don't reflect their actual preferences, they often change their attitudes to match their behavior rather than acknowledge they were manipulated. It's psychologically easier to believe, I chose this because it's who I am, than I was manipulated into this choice. So how do you defend against it? You name the false binary. That's not the only choice. I'm neither in both. I value quality when it matters, and I'm price-conscious when that's appropriate. Let's reframe this conversation entirely. You refuse the identities being offered. You step outside the frame. Because the power of this technique depends entirely on you accepting that these are the only two options for who you can be. Trick 15. The aspirational peer group. Now let's talk about belonging. Because humans aren't just individuals, we're intensely social. We define ourselves largely through group membership, and that makes us vulnerable. Think about a sentence like this: successful people invest in themselves. Sounds reasonable, right? Almost inspirational. But notice what just happened. Success has been defined by a behavior. Investing, probably financially, in something, probably the thing they're selling you. If you want to be successful, if you want to belong to that aspirational group, you know what you need to do. This is the aspirational peer group technique. Invoking a group you want to belong to as already making the choice the manipulator wants you to make. Fitness culture does this relentlessly. Real athletes don't make excuses. What's a real athlete? Someone who never misses a workout? Someone who trains through injury? Someone who never acknowledges legitimate obstacles? The phrase defines real athlete to pressure specific behavior. Keep training, don't question, ignore your body's signals. If you rest when you're exhausted, are you not a real athlete? The implicit threat, you'll be excluded from the group. Political discourse weaponizes this constantly. Smart voters can see through the media bias. Which media bias? Smart according to whom? Doesn't matter. If you want to be smart, and who doesn't, you need to agree with the speaker. Disagreement means you're not smart enough to see through the bias. The aspirational identity, smart voter, is tied directly to agreement. Workplaces deploy this to extract free labor. The people who get promoted around here are the ones who go above and beyond. Above and beyond what? Job descriptions? Reasonable hours? Work-life balance. The phrase defines promotion criteria as exceeding expectations, and suddenly above and beyond becomes the baseline. You want to be the kind of person who gets promoted, right? Well, here's how you prove it. Work unpaid overtime. Say yes to everything. Sacrifice your personal life. There's a subtle variation of this that's even more insidious. People who care about X always do Y. People who care about the environment always buy organic. People who care about their families always attend every gathering. People who care about social justice always speak up in every situation. The formula makes caring contingent on specific behavior, usually behavior that benefits the speaker. This technique draws on social identity theory, developed by Henri Tajfel and John Turner. We don't just have personal identities, we have social identities. We categorize ourselves as members of groups, and those memberships become part of our self-concept. Being excluded from valued groups is genuinely psychologically threatening. It's not shallow or superficial to care about belonging. It's deeply human, and manipulators know this. They know you want to be successful, smart, caring, dedicated. They know you want to belong to groups you admire. So they define those groups by the behaviors they want from you. The defense is to separate identity from behavior. You can be a real athlete and rest when injured. You can be smart and disagree with someone's interpretation. You can care deeply about your family and miss some gatherings. You can be successful without buying what they're selling. Group membership isn't determined by a single behavior, and anyone telling you it is, they're trying to manipulate your deep human need for belonging. Trick 16, the retroactive labeling. Here's something that happens more than you might realize. You do something once, express a boundary, make a choice, decline a request, and suddenly you're assigned a permanent character trait. You say no to one unreasonable demand at work, and you're told, you're not a team player. Not, you didn't want to do this specific thing. You are not a team player. Your identity has been defined by a single data point. This is retroactive labeling, taking one instance and treating it as confirming evidence of a stable personality characteristic. Relationships do this constantly. You express one boundary. Maybe you say you need advance notice before their friends come over. Maybe you ask them to stop making a particular joke at your expense. And you hear, you're so controlling. Not, this request feels controlling to me. You are controlling. One boundary has become your defining characteristic. Or you're unavailable once for a friend. You're sick. You're overwhelmed. You have a legitimate conflict. And they say, you're never there for me. Never. One instance has been retroactively expanded to encompass your entire history. You're not someone who was unavailable once. You're someone who is never available. That's who you are now. Family dynamics are particularly prone to this. You make one unconventional choice, take a different career path than expected, date someone they didn't predict, move to a different city, and suddenly, you've always been rebellious. Always. As if your entire childhood and adolescence were building toward this deviation from their expectations. One choice rewrites your entire character history. This connects to what psychologists call the fundamental attribution error. When other people behave in ways we don't like, we attribute it to their character. That's who they are. When we behave the same way, we attribute it to circumstances. That's the situation we were in. This labeling technique weaponizes that error. Your behavior gets attributed to your character permanently. There's also research from criminology on labeling theory. When someone is labeled as deviant, criminal, troublemaker, problem child, they often internalize that label and fulfill it. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. If everyone treats you as if you're controlling or unreliable or selfish, eventually you might start believing it, and your behavior might shift to match. The function of this technique is to make change seem impossible. If you are controlling, if that's your identity, then any attempt to prove otherwise just becomes more evidence of your controlling nature. You're trapped, and the person doing the labeling gets to dismiss any behavior they don't like by attributing it to your permanent character flaw. So what do? You refuse the label. That's one instance, not a pattern. Let's discuss this specific situation without extrapolating it to my entire identity. One data point doesn't define you. A pattern requires multiple instances over time. Don't let someone turn a single choice into your permanent character. Trick 17, the competence double bind. Now we need to talk about something more systemic, more insidious. There are situations where the rules are set up so that demonstrating competence in one valued area requires appearing incompetent in another valued area. No matter what you do, you lose. This is called the competence double bind, and it's particularly visible around gender in workplaces. A woman is assertive in a meeting. She's direct, she's confident, she advocates for her ideas. And she's labeled aggressive, not likable, too pushy. Those are coded ways of saying she's not performing femininity correctly. But if she's warm, collaborative, relationship-focused, all the things women are socialized to be, she's seen as not leadership material, not strategic enough, too soft. Assertive means incompetent at likability. Warm means incompetent at leadership. There's no way to win because the criteria contradict each other. Parenting has similar binds. If you stay home with your children, you're not career-oriented, not ambitious, wasting your education. If you work full-time, you're not dedicated to your children, prioritizing career over family, selfish. Either choice opens you up to judgment. Either choice becomes evidence of incompetence in the area you didn't choose. Social situations create these too. If you're knowledgeable, if you share what you know, you're arrogant, a show-off, making other people feel stupid. But if you play dumb, downplay your expertise, you're not actually that smart, insecure, fake modest. You can't be both knowledgeable and likable, according to the bind. Or dating. If you show interest, if you're clear about your feelings, you're desperate, too available, too intense. But if you play it cool, maintain distance, you're not actually interested, playing games, emotionally unavailable. Either way, you're doing it wrong. This comes from double bind theory, originally developed by Gregory Bateson. A double bind is a no-win situation where all responses get punished. And when these contradictions are systematic, when they consistently target certain groups of people, they create constant anxiety about self-presentation. Research on stereotype threat by Claude Steele and Joshua Aronson shows what happens psychologically. When you're in a situation where you might confirm a negative stereotype about your group, your cognitive resources get consumed by anxiety about that stereotype. It impairs performance. And ironically, the anxiety about appearing incompetent can actually make you perform worse, which then confirms the stereotype. The damage of competence double binds is profound. You can't win. So you start questioning yourself constantly. Am I being too much? Not enough? Should I speak up? Should I hold back? The mental energy consumed by this constant calibration is exhausting. And here's what's particularly insidious. These binds often reflect broader cultural contradictions placed on marginalized groups. Women should be assertive but not aggressive, but nobody can clearly define the line. Parents should be devoted but not helicopter parents. But the boundary is fuzzy and constantly shifting. It's not that you're failing to find the balance. It's that the balance doesn't exist. The defense isn't individual, it's collective. Recognizing these as systemic contradictions, not personal failures. Because you're not bad at navigating the situation. The situation is designed to be unnavigable. Trick 18. The origin story rewrite. Let me ask you something. How do you remember your own past? Your childhood, your previous relationships, your younger self? Now here's the uncomfortable question. How much of that memory is actually yours, and how much has been shaped by other people's interpretations? This is the origin story rewrite. Someone retroactively reinterpreting your past to fit a narrative that serves their current needs. Relationships do this in devastating ways. You have healthy boundaries. You're cautious in appropriate situations. You verify things before trusting completely. And your partner says, you've always had trust issues. Suddenly, your reasonable boundaries have been reframed as pathology. Your discernment has been pathologized as dysfunction. And the word always does something crucial. It makes this seem like a pre-existing condition you brought to the relationship, not a reasonable response to their behavior. Family systems run on these rewrites. You were such a difficult child. Were you? Or were you a normal child with normal needs, and they were inadequate parents? The narrative that you were inherently difficult justifies their treatment of you. It makes their parenting failures into your personality flaws. Workplaces deploy this right before termination. You've never really been committed to this role. They're rewriting your entire work history. All those late nights, those successful projects, that dedication, retroactively erased or reinterpreted. Now your entire tenure becomes a story of inadequate commitment, which justifies the firing. Cults and extreme groups are perhaps most explicit about this. Before you found us, your life was meaningless. They need to devalue your entire pre-group identity to make group membership seem essential to your worth. Everything you were before, rewritten as emptiness, confusion, lostness. Only within the group do you have real identity. This technique works because memory is reconstructive. Every time you remember something, You're not accessing a video file, you're rebuilding it. And during that reconstruction, you're vulnerable to suggestion, to reframing, to having your experience reinterpreted. Research on memory malleability shows how easily this happens. Elizabeth Loftus's work on false memories demonstrates that people can be led to remember entire events that never happened. Source monitoring errors mean we often can't remember where we learned something. Did we experience it, or did someone tell us we experienced it? Narrative identity theory suggests we understand ourselves through stories. The stories we tell about our past shape our sense of who we are. And when someone with power over us, a partner, a parent, a boss, rewrites those stories, it can genuinely alter how we remember our own experience. The danger is profound. Your past is part of your identity. When someone else controls the narrative about your past, they control part of your identity. They get to define who you've been, which influences who you think you can be. So how do you defend against this? Journal. Keep contemporaneous records of your experience. Maintain friendships outside the relationship with people who knew you before. Those external anchors help you hold on to your actual history when someone tries to rewrite it. When someone tells you who you've always been, check with yourself first. Check with people who knew you in different contexts. Your origin story belongs to you. Trick 19. The false growth framework. Here's one of the most psychologically sophisticated manipulation techniques out there, and it's everywhere right now because we're all swimming in the language of therapy and personal development. Someone tells you, if you really worked on yourself, you'd be okay with this. Notice what just happened. Your resistance, your boundary, your discomfort, it's been reframed as a deficit in your personal growth. The implication is that your objection isn't valid. It's just evidence you haven't healed enough yet. This is the false growth framework, co-opting the language of self-improvement to advance someone else's agenda. Relationships weaponize therapy language constantly now. A healed person wouldn't have boundaries with me. Think about that sentence. It takes the concept of healing and inverts it entirely. Healthy people have boundaries. Boundaries are evidence of self-knowledge and self-respect. But in this framework, boundaries become evidence of brokenness. Or you hear, if you'd done your inner work, you wouldn't be triggered by this. Maybe you're not triggered. Maybe you're having a completely appropriate response to inappropriate behavior. But by framing your response as a trigger, as your unprocessed trauma, they make their behavior irrelevant. The problem isn't what they did. The problem is your insufficient healing. MLMs and predatory coaching programs use this constantly. Your resistance to this opportunity is just your limiting beliefs. You have legitimate concerns. The business model doesn't make sense. The numbers don't add up. You can't afford the investment. But those concerns get reframed as psychological barriers you need to overcome. Your rational evaluation becomes evidence of your lack of growth mindset. Workplaces do this too. Having a growth mindset means being open to feedback. Sounds reasonable, right? Except the feedback only flows one direction. When you give feedback about workload, about unreasonable expectations, about poor management, that's not growth mindset, that's negativity. Growth mindset, in this framing, means accepting all criticism without offering any. This is related to what some researchers call concept creep in therapeutic language, psychological concepts expanding beyond their clinical meaning. And there's something called spiritual bypassing, where legitimate spiritual concepts get used to avoid dealing with actual problems. Just raise your vibration becomes a way to dismiss real grievances. The red flag is simple. Growth is always defined as becoming more like them or more compliant with their preferences. But here's what actual growth looks like. Sometimes it means moving away from manipulative relationships. Sometimes it means setting firmer boundaries. Sometimes it means trusting your judgment more, not less. Real growth is about becoming more yourself, not more acceptable to someone else. When someone tells you that your growth would lead you toward compliance with their wishes, that's not about your growth. That's about their control. Trick 20. The crystallized flaw. And finally, let's talk about something painful. How some people keep you insecure by design. You have a flaw. Everyone does. Maybe you're not great with punctuality. Maybe you sometimes struggle to articulate your thoughts under pressure. Maybe you came from a dysfunctional family. Maybe you made mistakes in your past. And someone in your life, a partner, a friend, a parent, a boss, they've identified that flaw. And they mention it. Not constantly, not even cruelly, just regularly. Just enough to keep it at the front of your mind. You know how you are with time management, haha. Well, you've never been great at public speaking. Given your family background, it makes sense you struggle with this. Remember when you did that thing 5 years ago? And often, it's followed with reassurance. But I love you anyway. It's okay. I accept you. I don't judge you for it. This is the crystallized flaw. Taking a genuine imperfection and repeatedly referencing it to keep you insecure and grateful for their acceptance. The mechanism is selective attention. Everyone has multiple flaws and multiple strengths. But when someone consistently focuses on one particular flaw, that flaw becomes disproportionately salient in your self-concept. It prevents you from seeing your complete self, the strengths, the growth, the other characteristics that matter. Relationships deploy this insidiously. They frequently mention your weight, your communication style, your sexual past, your family dysfunction, your previous relationship mistakes. And it's often couched as affection. Just kidding. You know I love you anyway. But the message underneath is, you're flawed, and you should be grateful I tolerate you. Friendships do this too. You're so lucky I put up with how flaky you are. Even as a joke, it's establishing a power dynamic. They're the generous one, putting up with your inadequacy. You should be grateful. You should work to make up for this flaw. Workplaces use this to keep employees insecure. A manager repeatedly references one performance issue despite an overall strong record. That one issue becomes your identifier, your weak point. And because it's always salient, you feel like you're always on thin ice, always needing to prove yourself. Family does this with childhood mistakes. One incident, one phase, one choice becomes your permanent identifier. Remember when you stole that candy at age 7? You're 40 now, but that moment is still being referenced, still defining you in their eyes. This technique relates to what sociologist Irving Goffman called stigma management, how people with devalued characteristics manage others' perceptions. It also connects to the looking glass self, Charles Cooley's concept that we develop our self-image partly through how we imagine others see us. When someone repeatedly signals that they see you through the lens of this one flaw, you start seeing yourself that way too. It's weaponized remembering. They remember your flaw. They forget or minimize everything else. The function is maintaining a power imbalance. As long as you feel flawed and they feel magnanimous for accepting you, you're not in an equal relationship. You're in a relationship where you owe them your gratitude, where you can't push back too hard, can't have too many needs, because you should be grateful they're tolerating your fundamental inadequacy. The pattern to watch for. The flaw is mentioned frequently enough to stay salient, but it's framed as not a big deal or accompanied by reassurance. That makes it harder to object. How can you complain when they're saying it lovingly? But here's the reality. Everyone has flaws. In healthy relationships, those flaws are acknowledged when relevant and then forgotten most of the time. They don't become your defining characteristic. They don't become the reason someone should be grateful for your presence. If someone keeps a running catalog of your imperfections while you're busy appreciating their full humanity, something's very wrong. You're not a collection of flaws held together by someone else's generosity. You're a whole person, and anyone who can't see that doesn't deserve access to you. Chapter 4. Reality Distortion Fields. Trick 21. The Microdose Denial. Let me tell you about something subtle that happens in manipulation. Someone doesn't start by denying big, important things. They start small, tiny, almost not worth arguing about. You text someone, see you at 6. Clear, unambiguous. Later, they show up at 7:30 and say, I never said I'd be home by 6. You're confused. You pull up your phone to show them the text, and they look at it and say, with complete confidence, that says 7. It doesn't say 7. You can see it says 6. But their certainty makes you doubt yourself for just a second. Did you misread it? Is your phone showing something different than theirs? You know what you're seeing, but their absolute conviction introduces just a tiny seed of uncertainty. That's the microdose denial. Denying small, verifiable things to make you doubt your perception before denying bigger things. This is incremental reality erosion. If they can make you uncertain about something small and verifiable, a text message, a conversation that happened yesterday, whether you discuss something in a meeting, then later, when bigger things are at stake, you've already learned not to trust yourself. Workplaces do this in meetings. You know a decision was made. You have notes. You wrote it down in real time. And 2 weeks later, someone says, "We didn't discuss that." You check your notes. It's right there. But they have such confidence, such certainty, and suddenly you're wondering, did I misunderstand? Did I write down my interpretation rather than what was actually said? Family systems run on this. That never happened. About something that absolutely, definitely happened. You remember it clearly, but they deny it so completely, so calmly, that you start questioning your own memory. Maybe it didn't happen the way you remember. Maybe you're being dramatic. Maybe your memory is unreliable. Sales situations use this too. You're quoted one price. You come back and it's different. I told you that was extra. They didn't. You were careful to ask, but now you're unsure. Were you not listening carefully enough? Did you miss something? This technique relates to gaslighting, the broad pattern of making someone question their sanity, but it's more specific. This is the particular tactic of small denials. Tiny contradictions of verifiable reality. Death by 1,000 tiny, that's not what happened is. Research on reality monitoring shows we're actually not as confident in our memories as we think we are. We second-guess ourselves relatively easily, especially when someone else expresses certainty. And studies on false memory implantation show that with repeated suggestion, people can be made to remember things that never happened or to doubt things that definitely did. Why is this effective? Because we want to be reasonable. We want to give people the benefit of the doubt. When there's a discrepancy between your memory and someone else's, your instinct is to think, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I misremembered. That generosity of spirit gets weaponized. The defense is simple but requires discipline. Document. Take contemporaneous notes. Screenshot texts. Keep records. Trust your documentation over someone's later memory or their later denial. When you have evidence, the microdose denial loses its power. They can deny all they want. You know what happened? Trick 22, the sane washing. Now here's something even more disorienting. It's not just one person denying reality. It's everyone around them explaining it away. Your parent screams at you over something trivial, truly loses control, says cruel things. And afterward, your siblings say, they're just stressed. That's just how they show love. You're being too sensitive. Or your boss has an explosive outburst in a meeting, yells, berates someone, throws things, and afterward your coworkers say, that's just their management style. They're passionate. They care deeply about the work. This is sane washing. Others reinterpret someone's clearly unreasonable behavior as reasonable to make you seem like the irrational one for seeing it as problematic. The mechanism is powerful because humans are social creatures. We use group consensus to determine reality. When everyone around you is saying, this is normal, this is fine, you're overreacting, you start to doubt your own perception even when it was accurate. Think about relationships where your friends defend your partner's red flags. They're working through some stuff. Everyone has baggage. You're being too demanding. Maybe you expressed concern that your partner monitors your phone, controls who you see, explodes when you don't respond immediately. Those are legitimate concerns. But when your friends explain it away as insecurity or past trauma, or they just really love you, suddenly you're the problem for not being understanding enough. This happens in public discourse too. A politician says something incoherent, contradictory, or clearly false. And commentators immediately begin the work of sane washing, reinterpreting it as strategic brilliance, four-dimensional chess, sophisticated messaging. The incoherence gets translated into intentional complexity. This relates to several psychological concepts. Pluralistic ignorance is when everyone privately disagrees, but publicly goes along because they think everyone else agrees. Collective rationalization is when groups develop justifications for decisions or behaviors that individuals might question. Groupthink is when the desire for harmony leads groups to suppress dissent and fail to critically evaluate ideas. The result is devastating. You become the problem for seeing the problem. You're too sensitive, too critical, too judgmental, not understanding enough. The person behaving badly gets protected by a wall of people explaining away their behavior. And you're left thinking, am I crazy, or is no one else seeing this? You're not crazy. You're seeing clearly. But clarity in a sane-washing environment gets labeled as the distortion. Trick 23. The emotional flux destabilization. Let me describe a morning. Your partner wakes up, holds you close, tells you you're their soulmate, they're everything. They're affectionate, warm, present. You feel secure, loved, connected. By afternoon, they're cold, distant, short with you. You ask if something's wrong. They say no, but their tone says yes. You can feel them pulling away, but you don't know why. You run through the day in your mind. What changed? What did you do? By evening, you're carefully trying to reconnect. And they turn on you. Why are you being so sensitive? Why are you always analyzing everything? I can't even have normal moods without you making it into a thing. Now you're confused about your own perception. Were they actually cold, or were you being oversensitive? Is this your fault for being too needy? This is emotional flux destabilization, rapidly cycling between warmth and coldness to keep you emotionally off balance and focused on managing the relationship. The mechanism is that an unpredictable emotional environment keeps you in reactive survival mode rather than evaluative mode. Instead of thinking clearly about whether this relationship is good for you, all your cognitive resources are consumed by trying to predict and manage their emotional state. Workplaces deploy this too. Your boss praises you publicly in the morning meeting. You're doing great work. They're so impressed. Then that same afternoon, you're called into their office and criticized harshly for something minor. No explanation for the shift. No acknowledgement that just hours ago you were exemplary. You leave the office completely disoriented about your standing. Friendships can have this pattern. Intense closeness. They text constantly, want to see you all the time, call you their best friend. Then unexplained withdrawal. Days of silence. When you finally connect, they're distant, distracted. Then suddenly intense again. The cycle repeats. You never know which version you're going to get. For children with a parent like this, it's particularly damaging. They never know if mom or dad will be loving or rageful. The same behavior might be met with affection one day and explosion the next. There's no way to predict, no way to feel safe, no way to develop a secure attachment. Research shows that unpredictability is deeply anxiety-inducing. Environmental stability is crucial for well-being. When your emotional environment is chaotic, your stress hormones stay elevated. Your executive function, your ability to think clearly, plan, make decisions, becomes impaired. This is different from normal mood variation. Everyone has better and worse days, more and less emotional bandwidth. But this flux has no discernible external cause. It's not tied to their life circumstances. And crucially, it serves a control function. When you're off balance, you're easier to manage. The effect is that you stop evaluating the relationship and start managing their moods. You become hypervigilant to emotional shifts. You read their face, their tone, their body language constantly. You adjust your behavior to try to maintain the good version. You lose yourself in the process of managing them. Trick 24. The proxy validation. Here's a particularly isolating manipulation tactic. You're in a disagreement with someone. You're expressing a concern, setting a boundary, or pushing back on something. And they say, I talked to my mom about this, and she agrees you're overreacting. Or, I've gotten feedback from the team that you're difficult to work with. Or, everyone thinks you're being unreasonable, not just me. Suddenly, it's not just their opinion against yours. It's you against everyone. You're the outlier. The consensus, which they're reporting but you haven't heard directly, is that you're wrong. This is proxy validation, recruiting others to validate their perspective and make you seem like the outlier who just can't see reality correctly. The mechanism is social proof. We're deeply influenced by what we believe others think. When someone tells us that everyone agrees with them, it's psychologically difficult to maintain our own position. We assume we must be missing something. In relationships, this often shows up as triangulation. They've discussed your relationship with someone else, conveniently someone who isn't present, someone you can't verify with directly. I showed our text conversation to my friend, and they were shocked by how you spoke to me. Maybe they did show their friend. Maybe they showed a selectively edited version. Maybe they didn't show anyone at all. You can't verify it. But the claim itself creates pressure. Workplaces use this in vague, unverifiable ways. I've been getting feedback. From whom? About what specifically? When? You're never told. You're just informed that there's this cloud of negative perception around you. It's impossible to address feedback you can't access. But it makes you feel like you're on thin ice, like everyone sees a problem you can't see. Family systems operate on this constantly. Everyone thinks you're being unreasonable. Everyone who? Did they actually discuss it? And if they did everyone hear both sides? Or just the version designed to make you look bad? Social dynamics use this too. I showed people what you said, and they all think you're wrong. Which people? Did they see the full context? Or just a screenshot? Did they actually all agree? Or is that an exaggeration? This connects to research on conformity pressure and what abuse dynamics experts call flying monkeys. People recruited to do the abuser's bidding, often without realizing they're being manipulated. The red flags are clear. They speak for others who aren't present. You're not given the opportunity to hear these concerns directly or to provide your perspective. The validation is always vague. You never get specific, actionable feedback you could actually address. The function is to make their perspective seem like objective reality. It's not just their opinion. It's what everyone thinks. You're alone in your perception. The defense? Can we bring these people into the conversation? I'd like to hear their concerns directly and offer my perspective. Watch what happens. Usually they can't or won't facilitate that conversation. Because often those people either don't exist, didn't actually say what's being claimed, or only heard one very slanted version of events. Trick 25. The context collapse. Let me tell you about something that probably feels familiar. You've been dealing with something for months. Someone repeatedly canceling plans, ignoring your requests, dismissing your concerns. You've been patient. You've been clear. You've given them multiple chances to address it. And finally, you've had enough. You respond sharply. You express your frustration. Your tone is not gentle. And that moment, that single moment of sharp response, becomes the entire story. I can't believe you spoke to me that way. The months of their behavior? Irrelevant. The pattern that led to your response? Disappeared. All that exists now is your reaction, stripped of everything that preceded it. This is context collapse. Removing context from your words or actions to make reasonable things seem unreasonable. The mechanism is simple but effective. Meaning exists in context. When you remove context, you can create new meaning entirely. Relationships weaponize this constantly. You finally snap after months of provocation. They focus only on your reaction, not on their pattern. You're the one who yelled. You're the one who was harsh. The fact that you yelled after the 50th time they did something you'd repeatedly asked them not to do, that context gets erased. Workplaces do this with email. You send a direct, firm email. It seems harsh. What's missing is the 12 previous emails where you politely requested the same thing and were ignored. Each of those emails was professional, patient, appropriate. But by the 12th time, your patience has worn thin. And that 12th email, without the context of the previous 11, makes you look unreasonable. Social media has turned context collapse into an art form. A quote taken out of the surrounding explanation. A video clip that starts after the provocation and shows only the response. A screenshot of one message from a longer conversation. The technology makes decontextualization effortless. Legal situations depend on this too. Footage that starts after the provocation. You see someone defending themselves, but you don't see what they're defending themselves from. The response looks aggressive. The initial action that made the response necessary is conveniently absent. This relates to the fundamental attribution error in psychology. We overweight dispositional factors, character, personality, and underweight situational factors when explaining others' behavior. When someone does something negative and we don't see the context, we attribute it to who they are rather than what they were responding to. The digital age has amplified this exponentially. It's easier than ever to extract a moment from its context. Screenshots, clips, quotes, all can be selectively shared to create whatever narrative the person wants. The pattern to watch for: I can't believe you said X, or I can't believe you did X. X without Y. The action without the circumstances that led to it. Your words without the conversation that preceded them. Your behavior without the pattern you were responding to. Trick 26. The recovered memory suggestion. Now we need to talk about something deeply unsettling: the malleability of memory itself. Someone says to you, "Don't you remember how mean you were to me at that party last year?" You remember the party. You remember the conversation. It was fine, normal. You don't remember being mean. But they're insisting. They're describing your tone, your words, the look on your face. And slowly, your memory of a neutral interaction starts to take on a different color. Were you mean? You don't think so. But they seem so certain. This is recovered memory suggestion. Planting suggestions that make you believe something happened that didn't, or that something innocent was actually harmful. Memory is reconstructive. Every time you recall something, you're rebuilding it from fragments. And during that reconstruction, you're vulnerable to suggestion. Someone can introduce new elements during recall, and those elements can become part of the memory itself. This shows up devastatingly in therapy malpractice. A therapist hears about a normal but difficult childhood and says, "What you're describing sounds like repressed abuse." The client wasn't thinking of it as abuse, but the therapist is the expert. Maybe they're seeing something the client couldn't see. And gradually, through repeated suggestion, normal childhood difficulties get reframed as trauma. Sometimes entirely false memories of abuse get constructed. Relationships use this more subtly. They recolor past interactions. You probably don't remember, but you were really cruel when. They're not just describing their experience of something that happened. They're telling you what you did, how you were, what your intentions were. And if you don't remember it clearly, their version can overwrite your memory. Interrogation techniques have weaponized this. We have evidence you were there. You weren't. You know you weren't. But they're so confident. They describe details. They act like it's already proven. And under pressure, exhausted, confused, people sometimes confess to things they didn't do. They start to doubt their own memories. Maybe they were there and somehow forgot. Cults use this to rewrite pre-group identity. You were lost before you found us. Remember how meaningless everything felt. Maybe you were going through a rough patch. Normal existential questions. But they frame it as profound lostness, emptiness, desperation. And over time, with repeated telling, your memory of your pre-group life becomes this dark period of meaninglessness, even if it wasn't. This technique draws on Elizabeth Loftus's research on the misinformation effect and false memory implantation. She demonstrated that people can be led to remember entire events that never happened, being lost in a mall as a child, for instance. Source monitoring errors mean we often can't distinguish between things we experienced and things we were told happened to us. The ethical gravity here is profound. Memory is core to identity. When someone alters your memories, they're altering your understanding of yourself, your past, your relationships. It's a violation of selfhood at a deep level. The subtlety to watch for: phrases like, "Don't you remember when?" or "You probably don't remember, but." Both introduce suggestion while simultaneously making it hard for you to push back. If you don't remember clearly, how can you contradict their version? Trick 27. The reality revision history. And finally, let's talk about how the past gets rewritten slowly over years. When you first met your partner, the story was romantic. You saw each other across the room. There was instant chemistry. You both felt it. Over the years, you've told that story together many times. But notice how the story has shifted. Now when it's told, you were pursuing them. You were interested. They were uncertain. You pushed for the relationship. They were hesitant. The story of mutual attraction has become a story of you chasing someone who wasn't sure they wanted you. This is reality revision history, gradually shifting the narrative of past events over time until the current version is unrecognizable from what actually happened. The mechanism is serial retellings with small changes that compound. Each time a story gets told, it changes slightly. Usually the changes serve the narrator's current needs or self-image. And because we rarely check our current version against the original, the drift goes unnoticed. Family systems run on this. Family mythology rewrites difficult history. We were so happy. Were you? Or has time and repeated retelling smoothed over the conflicts, the struggles, the dysfunction? The uncomfortable parts fade. The story becomes what everyone needs it to be. Proof that the family was strong, loving, functional, even when the lived experience was different. Workplaces do this with projects. A project that was genuinely a team effort gets retold over time. Gradually, in the manager's telling, they single-handedly saved it. Individual contributions get minimized or erased. The manager's role gets amplified. By the time the story has been told a dozen times, it's become, manager heroically rescues failing project from incompetent team. This happens at cultural and historical levels too. Collective memories get sanitized. Negative events get minimized or reframed. Positive events get amplified and mythologized. The actual history becomes less accessible than the story we've told ourselves about the history. Research on collective memory distortion shows this happens reliably. Narrative transportation, getting caught up in a story, makes us more likely to accept the story's version of events as truth. The social sharedness heuristic means we trust information more when it's shared across multiple people, even though social sharing is exactly what enables distortion. Why does this work? Because each telling feels like the truth. We're not consciously lying when we tell a slightly altered version. We're telling it the way we remember it now, and we rarely check our current memory against contemporaneous records. We don't go back to old journals, old emails, other people's accounts from the time. We trust the story as it's been refined through repeated telling. The effect is that years later, even you start to remember the revised version. Your original experience gets overwritten by the story you've heard repeatedly, even when you're the one who lived it. Chapter 5. Obligation Architecture. Trick 28. The Unasked Favor. Let me tell you about something that creates obligation out of thin air. Your partner announces they're moving to your city. You didn't ask them to. You were managing the distance fine. Maybe you even had concerns about moving too fast. But they decided, they moved, and now, 2 years later, during an argument, you hear, "I moved to this city for you. I gave up everything for this relationship." Wait, you didn't ask for that. That was their choice. But suddenly it's a debt you owe. This is the unasked favor. Doing something for you that you didn't request or want, then expecting reciprocation. Family dynamics run on this. A parent gives you money you didn't ask for. Maybe you were managing fine. Maybe you were uncomfortable accepting it. But they insisted. And now, every time you make a decision they don't like, you hear, "After everything I've done for you, after all the money I've given you." The favor becomes leverage. The gift becomes control. Workplaces have this too. A coworker takes on part of your work without asking. You didn't delegate it. You were handling it. But they jumped in, and now they expect you to do their tasks later. The unsolicited help created an obligation you never agreed to. Or think about a friend who gives extravagant gifts you're uncomfortable with. You asked for something small or nothing at all. They spent way more than you wanted them to. And now you're expected to reciprocate at that level. You're trapped in an exchange you never consented to. This exploits the reciprocity norm, the social expectation that favors should be returned. But healthy reciprocity requires consent. Generosity has no strings attached. This isn't generosity. This is creating leverage. The pattern to watch for: I did X for you. When you never agreed to that exchange. When you never asked for X. When X might have even been unwanted. The defense is boundary setting before the favor happens. I appreciate the thought, but I don't need help with this. Please don't spend more than amount on gifts. Let's discuss this before you make that kind of sacrifice. Because once the unasked favor is done, they've written themselves an IOU in your name. And they'll cash it in when it serves them. Trick 29. The manufactured emergency. Here's how this works. You're looking at a car. You're still deciding. The salesman says, "This price is only available today. Tomorrow it goes back up." Your deliberation time just collapsed. You need to decide now. No time to sleep on it. Research more, compare options. The urgency bypasses your careful thinking. That's the manufactured emergency. Creating or exaggerating urgency to bypass your normal decision-making process. The thing is, that price? It's available tomorrow. And next week. The urgency is artificial, designed to push you into fast thinking, reactive, emotional, impulsive, rather than slow thinking, deliberative, analytical, careful. Relationships deploy this emotionally. I need to know right now if you're committed to this relationship. Why right now? What changed? Often nothing changed except they want an answer before you've had time to think clearly about whether this relationship is actually good for you. Workplaces use this constantly. I need this by end of day. You check. There's no actual deadline. No client waiting. No time-sensitive dependency. But the artificial urgency prevents you from questioning the request, from pushing back on whether this is really your responsibility or your priority. Scams are built entirely on manufactured emergency. Your account will be locked in 1 hour unless you verify your information immediately. Real institutions don't operate this way, but the panic short-circuits your skepticism. Research on time pressure shows it reliably degrades decision quality. Cognitive load increases. Your ability to evaluate options decreases. You rely on heuristics and shortcuts rather than careful analysis. And the urgency heuristic makes you treat time-sensitive options as more valuable, even when they're not. Daniel Kahneman's work on System 1 versus System 2 thinking explains why this works. System 1 is fast, automatic, emotional. System 2 is slow, deliberate, rational. When you're under time pressure, you're pushed into System 1. And System 1 is much easier to manipulate. The defense requires counterintuitive thinking. If this is truly urgent, I need time to assess it properly. If it can't wait for me to think clearly, something's wrong. Real urgency is rare. Manufactured urgency is constant. Learn to tell the difference. Trick 30. The implied contract. You've been on 3 dates with someone. Things are going well. You're enjoying getting to know them. And then they get upset that you went to dinner with a friend who happens to be an attractive gender to you. I thought we were exclusive. You never had that conversation. No agreement was made. But they're behaving as if one existed. And now you're in the position of either accepting a commitment you never made or being the person who violated an agreement that was never actually agreed to. This is the implied contract. Behaving as if an agreement exists when none was explicitly made. Friendships do this. I thought we told each other everything. Did you agree to that? Was there a conversation where you both committed to complete disclosure? Or is this person unilaterally imposing an expectation and then making you feel like you violated their trust by not meeting an obligation you never accepted? Workplaces sneak this in after hiring. The job description said Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. 3 months in, you hear, this role sometimes requires weekends. That wasn't in the job description. That wasn't discussed in interviews. But it's being presented as if it was always part of the agreement. Family does this with cultural scripts. Family takes care of each other. Okay, but what does that mean specifically? Which obligations are included? Because family takes care of each other can mean anything from basic emotional support to complete financial entanglement, from occasional help to dropping everything whenever anyone needs anything. The power of implied contracts is that violating an agreement you never made still feels like breaking a promise. You feel guilty. You feel like you're letting someone down, even though you never actually agreed to what they're expecting. Research on psychological contracts in organizations shows that employees often have different understandings of their obligations than employers do. When those unspoken expectations aren't met, it feels like betrayal, even though the expectations were never explicitly communicated. The defense is making expectations explicit. Let's talk about what exclusivity means to both of us before we assume we're on the same page. What specifically are you expecting from me in this friendship? Can we clarify what this role actually requires? Get the implied contract out into the open where it can be examined, negotiated, and actually agreed to, or not. Trick 31. The granular incrementalism. Think about how you got here. Your partner wanted to see your phone. We're close, we don't have secrets, right? That seemed reasonable. Openness is good. Then they started reading your messages. I just happened to see it while we were looking at photos together. Still framed as accidental, innocent. Then they asked for your passwords. If you have nothing to hide, why would you mind? Each request built on the previous acceptance. Now they're monitoring your location, reading your email, and questioning every interaction. And if you object, you hear, "You let me see your phone before." Why is this different? This is granular incrementalism. Shifting boundaries or expectations in tiny increments, each too small to protest, until you've arrived somewhere you'd never have agreed to initially. Each step seemed reasonable. The accumulated path is absolutely unreasonable. Workplaces do this with hours. Just this once. Can you work Saturday? We're in a crunch. You say yes because it's presented as exceptional. But just this once becomes twice, then monthly, then expected. And when you finally push back, you hear, "You've done it before." I don't understand why it's suddenly a problem. Tech companies do this with app permissions. An app starts by asking for minimal access. Then an update needs your location. Then your contacts. Then your photos. Each permission request seems small. But gradually, the app has access to your entire digital life. Political systems erode rights this way. Temporary emergency measures that become permanent. Each expansion of power is justified by crisis, presented as temporary, framed as necessary. But the emergency never quite ends. The powers never quite get returned. This is the boiling frog metaphor made real. If you drop a frog in boiling water, it jumps out. But if you put it in cool water and heat it gradually, it stays until it's cooked. The gradual change is harder to notice and harder to resist than sudden change. The research calls this normalization of deviance. Small departures from standard practice get normalized. Then those become the new baseline, and further departures get normalized from there. Over time, practices that would have been immediately rejected become accepted as normal. The defense requires periodic zooming out. Would you accept the current reality if it were presented to you initially? If your partner had said on the first date, "I'll need full access to all your devices and accounts," would you have agreed? If the job interview had specified, "You'll work most weekends," would you have taken the job? If the answer is no, then the gradual path got you somewhere you never would have gone directly. And it's not too late to say, "This isn't working for me anymore." Trick 32. The hostage negotiation. Let's talk about what happens when something you value gets used as leverage. "If you don't do what I want, I'll leave." That's not a conversation. That's not stating a preference or a boundary. That's holding the relationship hostage to secure compliance. This is the hostage negotiation. Taking something you value, a relationship, a job, access to your children, financial stability, and threatening it to force your compliance. Workplaces do this when circumstances change. Either you accept these new terms or we'll have to let you go. The new terms weren't part of your original agreement. Their worst terms: lower pay, longer hours, relocated position. But the threat of job loss is used to extract compliance you'd never give freely. Family systems weaponize this around holidays and events. If you don't come to every holiday gathering, you obviously don't care about this family. They're not saying, "I'd really like you to be there." They're saying your family membership is contingent on compliance with their attendance expectations. Legal and custody situations see this devastatingly. Agree to this arrangement, or I'll make court very expensive for you. I'll drag this out. I'll make your life hell. The threat isn't about what's fair or what's best for children. It's about using superior resources or willingness to cause harm to extract concessions. This is coercive control. This is duress. Research on decision-making under duress shows that compliance gained through threats isn't genuine consent. It's capitulation. There's an important distinction here. This is different from healthy boundaries. A boundary is, "If you continue to speak to me disrespectfully, I'll leave this conversation." That's self-protection. A threat is, "If you don't do what I want, I'll leave this relationship." That's control. The pattern to watch for. The threat is always disproportionate to the request. Do this relatively small thing or lose everything. The imbalance reveals the coercion. The effect is compliance without genuine consent. You agree because the alternative is losing something essential. But resentment accumulates. The relationship becomes a prison where you're constantly negotiating with a captor. Trick 33. The debt ledger. Here's something you might recognize. You're in an argument with your partner. They say, "I always support your career. I always make time for your family. I always prioritize what matters to you." And you're standing there thinking, "I support your career too. I make time for your family. I prioritize you constantly." But somehow, when they're tallying contributions, only theirs count. This is the debt ledger. Keeping detailed mental accounting of everything they've done for you while conveniently forgetting everything you've done for them. Friendships run on this sometimes. Remember when I helped you move 3 years ago? Yes, you do remember. You also remember helping them move twice since then, plus lending them money, plus being there through their breakup. But somehow, in their accounting, your contributions don't appear. Family does this with martyrdom scripts. A parent maintains a running tally of every sacrifice they made, every time they drove you somewhere, every dollar they spent, every inconvenience they endured. But your caregiving as they age, your emotional labor, your compromises, not recorded in the ledger. Workplaces have this in boss-employee dynamics. Your boss remembers the one time they let you leave early for a doctor's appointment. They forget the dozens of times you stayed late, came in on weekends, covered for absent coworkers, went above and beyond with no recognition. This is rooted in motivated forgetting and self-serving bias. We naturally remember information that makes us look good and forget information that doesn't serve our narrative. We remember our own sacrifices more vividly than others' sacrifices because we experienced ours directly and others only indirectly. Research on equity sensitivity in relationships shows that people vary in how much they care about balance. Some people are benevolents, who give more than they receive. Some are entitled's, who expect to receive more than they give. But the debt ledger isn't about natural variation, it's about deliberate asymmetry. Their contributions are investments you owe back. Your contributions are baseline expectations that don't count as deposits in the relationship account. The emotional result is exhausting. You feel perpetually behind, never even, always indebted. No matter what you give, the ledger never balances because they're not tracking your contributions, only their own. Trick 34. The preemptive guilt. And finally, let's talk about guilt that arrives before you've done anything wrong. You're planning how to spend the holidays. You haven't made any decisions yet. Before you've even finished thinking through your options, you hear, "I guess I'll just spend the holidays alone." The guilt arrives before the behavior. You haven't declined anything. You haven't chosen to be absent. But you're already being made to feel guilty for something you haven't done. This is preemptive guilt. Activating guilt before behavior, not after, to constrain your choices. Family does this constantly. I know you're too busy for your aging parent. Maybe you have legitimate reasons why visiting this week is difficult. Work deadlines, health issues, prior commitments. But before you've even said no, before you've even been asked, the guilt is already there. You're too busy. You don't care enough. The preemptive framing makes it harder to assert your actual boundaries. Workplaces deploy this before requests. "I'm sure you have better things to do than help the team with this project." You haven't been asked yet. You haven't declined. But the statement preloads the choice with guilt. If you do decline, you're confirming their accusation. If you accept despite not having capacity, they've successfully manipulated you. Friendships use this too. "You're probably going to forget my birthday again, like last year." Maybe you forgot once. Maybe you didn't even forget. Maybe there was a miscommunication. But now the expectation has been set. The guilt has been activated in advance. It's much harder to forget now because the preemptive guilt has made the stakes higher. Research on anticipatory guilt shows it's a powerful behavioral control mechanism. Guilt is uncomfortable. We're motivated to avoid it. When someone makes us feel guilty before we've even made a choice, we often make our choice to avoid the guilt rather than based on what actually works for us. The function is constraining your choices by pre-associating them with guilt. You're not freely choosing. You're choosing to avoid the negative emotion they've already activated. The counter is noticing when guilt is being activated before you've actually done anything. You haven't made a choice yet. You haven't declined anything. The guilt has no actual basis because the behavior it's supposedly about hasn't happened. When you notice this pattern, you can name it. I haven't made any plans yet. Let's have that conversation when I actually have information to share, rather than me feeling guilty before I've done anything. Chapter 6. Social Pressure Mechanics. Trick 35. The Spotlight Enforcement. Picture this. You're at a baseball stadium. The Jumbotron suddenly shows your face. Your partner is on one knee. 50,000 people are watching. The crowd starts chanting. Cameras are recording. Everyone is waiting for your answer. How free are you, really, to say no in that moment? This is spotlight enforcement. Making requests or pressing issues in public or group settings where social pressure makes it harder to refuse. The mechanism is the audience effect. We behave differently when others are watching. Things we might decline privately become much harder to refuse publicly because refusing feels like performing selfishness in front of witnesses. Workplaces deploy this in meetings constantly. Your boss doesn't ask you privately if you can take on an extra project. They ask in the team meeting, "Can you handle this?" Everyone is watching. Saying no seems uncooperative, uncommitted, not a team player. So you say yes, even though your workload is already unsustainable. Social situations weaponize this too. A friend asks to borrow money at a group dinner. Not privately, later. Right there, in front of everyone. Saying no makes you look cheap, uncaring, not a real friend. The audience creates pressure that wouldn't exist in a private conversation. Sales seminars use this deliberately. Would anyone like to volunteer to share how this program has changed their life? The setup creates peer pressure. Someone volunteers, gives a glowing testimonial, and suddenly everyone else feels pressure to participate, to buy, to demonstrate they're part of this transformative experience. Research on public commitment devices shows that we're much more likely to follow through on commitments made publicly. That's sometimes useful. Telling friends you're quitting smoking creates helpful accountability. But when the public nature is weaponized, when someone deliberately uses an audience to extract commitment you wouldn't give privately, that's manipulation. The ethical boundary is simple. Requests that should be comfortable to decline publicly are probably genuine. Requests that only work because declining publicly is uncomfortable are manipulative. If someone truly respects your autonomy, they'll ask you privately, where you're free to consider your actual capacity and preferences without performing for an audience. Trick 36. The Distributed Accountability. Here's something that happens in organizations all the time. Something goes wrong, something harmful, and when you try to find out who decided it, who's responsible, you hear, "The team decided." The team decided. No individual. No specific person who owns the decision. Just the team. This is distributed accountability. Spreading responsibility across enough people that no individual feels accountable. The mechanism is diffusion of responsibility. When responsibility is shared among many people, each individual feels less personally responsible. Everyone assumes someone else is handling it, owning it, being accountable for it. Think about corporate harm. A company does something destructive, environmental damage, predatory lending, privacy violations. You try to find who's responsible. The CEO says it was a board decision. The board says they relied on management recommendations. Management says they were following standard industry practice. Everyone's hands are clean because responsibility got diffused across so many people that it disappeared. This is the bystander effect at an organizational level. Research by Darley and Latain showed that the more people witness an emergency, the less likely any individual is to help. Each person assumes someone else will intervene. Responsibility diffuses into inaction. Tech companies have perfected this with algorithmic decisions. Your loan gets denied. Who decided? An algorithm. Who programmed the algorithm? A team. Who approved its use? A committee. Who's responsible for the discriminatory outcome? Nobody specifically. The decision got laundered through enough layers of technology and collective process that no human accepts responsibility. The dark application is deliberately structuring decisions so no one can be held accountable. When systems are designed so that responsibility is unclear, harm becomes easier to cause because there's no clear target for accountability. The pattern to watch for. We all agreed. But probe a bit, and you'll find no one person actually owns the decision. No one's name is on it. It emerged from some collective process where everyone participated, but no one decided. Real accountability requires specific ownership. Someone needs to say, I decided this. I'm responsible for the outcome. When that clarity is deliberately avoided, when decisions are structured to obscure responsibility, that's not collaboration, it's accountability avoidance. Trick 37. The conformity cascade. You're in a meeting. A proposal is presented. The leader says, everyone else is on board with this direction. Any concerns? Are you going to be the one person who raises their hand, when apparently everyone else already agrees? Probably not. Even if you have serious reservations. This is the conformity cascade, creating the appearance of unanimous consensus to pressure holdouts into compliance. The mechanism combines informational influence. If everyone agrees, maybe I'm missing something, with normative influence. I don't want to be the deviant who breaks consensus. Sales uses this constantly. Everyone in your neighborhood has already upgraded their security system. Have they? Maybe. Maybe not. But the claim creates pressure. You don't want to be the only household without adequate security. You don't want to be left behind while everyone else makes the smart choice. Social movements leverage this by making dissent seem rare. Everyone thinks this way now. The conversation has moved on. It creates the impression that questioning the dominant narrative makes you a holdout, clinging to outdated ideas while everyone else has evolved. Families do this by presenting a united front to one member. We all think you should take this job offer. We all think you should end this relationship. We all agree about this. The unanimous "we" isolates the individual, makes their perspective seem like the outlier against objective reality. The Ash conformity experiments demonstrated this powerfully. People would give obviously wrong answers to simple questions. Which line is longer? When everyone else in the room gave that wrong answer first. The pressure to conform is strong enough to override our own perception. Here's the reality. Often fewer people actually agree than it appears. Pluralistic ignorance means we often think we're alone in our concerns when actually many others share them. They're just not speaking up either because they think everyone else agrees. The function is isolating dissenters and making questioning seem deviant. When you believe you're the only one with concerns, it's much harder to voice them. The defense is being willing to be the first person who speaks up. Often, once one person voices a concern, others admit they shared it but were afraid to be alone. Trick 38. The loyalty test. Let's talk about how disagreement gets reframed as betrayal. You have a boundary. You disagree with a decision. You question a direction. And instead of engaging with your actual concern, you hear, a real friend would do this for me. Your boundary just became a loyalty test. Your disagreement became evidence of insufficient allegiance. This is the loyalty test, framing reasonable boundaries or disagreements as failures of loyalty. The mechanism is conflating loyalty with agreement. But those aren't the same thing. Loyalty is consistency of allegiance. Agreement is alignment of opinion. You can be deeply loyal to someone and still disagree with them. In fact, carrying disagreement is often more loyal than blind agreement. Friendships weaponize this when boundaries are set. A real friend would lend me money without asking questions. A real friend would cancel their plans to be there for me. A real friend wouldn't need me to explain why this matters. Friendship is being defined as lack of boundaries, as unconditional compliance. Workplaces use this when direction is questioned. Are you really part of this team? The question isn't about whether your concerns are valid. It's about whether you're loyal enough to suppress those concerns. Team membership is being defined as compliance. Political discourse lives here. You're either with us or against us. Nuanced positions disappear. Partial agreement is treated as complete opposition. Loyalty requires total alignment. No deviation, no questions. Relationships use this to suppress legitimate concerns. If you loved me, you wouldn't question this. If you really trusted me, you wouldn't need reassurance. If you were committed, you'd just do what I'm asking. Love, trust, and commitment are all being defined as blind acceptance. Research on in-group loyalty shows that groups often maintain cohesion through exclusion threats. The threat of being cast out for insufficient loyalty keeps members compliant. But healthy groups can tolerate disagreement. Strong relationships can handle boundaries. The false equation is loyalty equals agreement. Real loyalty can include caring disagreement. Sometimes the most loyal thing you can do is push back, question, refuse to go along with something harmful. The red flag is when actual betrayal, dishonesty, harm, violation of explicit agreements gets conflated with disagreement or boundaries. Those aren't the same category of behavior. Trick 39, the isolation chamber. Now let's talk about something more gradual and more sinister. How someone slowly separates you from everyone else in your life. It starts subtly. Your partner says, "Your friends don't really understand our connection. They don't get us." That seems almost romantic at first. You two have something special, something others can't comprehend. Then, I feel like they're not really supportive of you. They seem kind of toxic, honestly. Now it's framed as concern for your well-being. They're trying to protect you from negative influences. Eventually, you've stopped seeing those friends. And suddenly, your partner is your only source of perspective on your relationship. There's no one left to say, "That's not normal. That's not okay." This is the isolation chamber, gradually separating someone from external perspectives and support systems. The mechanism is removing reality checks. When you're isolated, the manipulator becomes your only source of information about what's normal, what's reasonable, what's acceptable. They control the narrative because there's no one else providing comparison points. Cults are explicit about this. The outside world is corrupted. They won't understand what we're building here. We're your real family now. Physical and social isolation is deliberate strategy. Cut ties with family, friends, anyone who might offer perspective that contradicts the group's narrative. Workplaces do this more subtly. This industry is unique. People outside it don't understand the pressures we face. They can't really advise you about your career. It discourages seeking outside perspective, keeps you relying solely on people within the system who have investment in keeping you there. Extremist groups use information isolation. Mainstream media lies. Only trust these sources. Everyone else is trying to deceive you. Eventually, you're in an echo chamber where all information confirms the group's worldview and anything contradicting it is dismissed as manipulation. The process is usually gradual. They don't say on day one, "Cut off all your friends." Each friend or family member gets framed as individually problematic. This one is jealous. That one is controlling. This one doesn't support you. One by one, your external connections get severed. Research on coercive control identifies social isolation as a key component. When someone is isolated, they lose access to support systems that could help them leave. They lose access to alternative perspectives that could help them recognize abuse. The result is the manipulator becomes your only reality tester. If they tell you something is normal, you have no one else to ask. If they tell you you're overreacting, you have no one to confirm that your reaction is proportional. Here's the warning sign. Healthy relationships encourage outside connections. They want you to have friends, family, support systems. Unhealthy relationships systematically dismantle those connections. Trick 40. The collective memory override. And finally, something brief but powerful. How group memory can override individual memory. Your family sits around reminiscing. Remember what a happy childhood we had. We were so close, so loving. Everyone is nodding, agreeing, sharing warm stories. Except, that's not how you remember it. You remember tension, conflict, dysfunction. But everyone else seems to remember something completely different. And the unanimity of their version makes you doubt your own. This is collective memory override. The group collectively remembers events differently than they occurred, pressuring individuals to accept the group version. The mechanism is social contagion of memory. When multiple people express the same memory, it becomes the official version. Your individual memory, even when accurate, feels unreliable against group consensus. Workplaces do this with projects. The team remembers something as a success. You remember it as barely functional, achieved only through unsustainable overtime and overlooked problems. But the collective narrative is success, and raising concerns now seems like retroactive negativity. Friend groups can do this too. Remember when you did that thing? You didn't do that thing. You're certain, but multiple people insist you did. The social pressure to accept their version is intense. Research on memory conformity shows we're surprisingly susceptible to adopting memories that others express, especially when multiple people confirm the same version. Trusting your memory against group certainty is psychologically demanding. The difficulty is that sometimes groups genuinely remember better than individuals. Multiple perspectives can fill in gaps. But sometimes groups construct convenient fictions that serve their current needs, and individual accuracy gets overridden by collective mythology. Chapter 7. Transactional Disguises. Trick 41. The Investment Illusion. They tell you it's an investment in your future. That's the script, the soft promise that tomorrow will make sense of today's suffering. You give your time, your labor, your dignity, and in return, you're handed a story. A story about patience, hustle, and delayed rewards. But here's the trick. In many of these investments, the future never arrives. Let's start with one of the most common illusions, the unpaid internship. You're told, this isn't about money, it's about experience. They say, connections are more valuable than cash. So you stay late. You grind. You fetch coffee, organize files, and carry the weight of a real employee, without the pay, without the respect, without even a guarantee that this sacrifice will mean anything later. It's exploitation disguised as mentorship. You're not investing in your career, you're subsidizing someone else's payroll. Corporations discovered long ago that ambition is the cheapest labor source. So they offer opportunity instead of income, visibility instead of value. And for every one intern who climbs the ladder, hundreds remain stuck, told to just keep pushing. But here's the truth. Real investments have clear metrics and measurable returns. A legitimate internship gives structured training, meaningful responsibility, and a defined pathway to advancement. Anything else is just free labor wrapped in future tense. The same illusion thrives in multi-level marketing schemes, the kind that promise you financial freedom if you invest in yourself by buying a starter kit or stocking up on overpriced products. They frame it like entrepreneurship. They talk about being your own boss. But you're not the boss, you're the customer. The investment is designed to make you the source of revenue. You're told to spend now for a freedom that's always just around the corner. The dream of escaping the 9-to-5 becomes another cage, just with motivational quotes on the walls. And it doesn't stop in business. It creeps into relationships too. The phrase changes, but the mechanism remains the same. I know I'm difficult now, but I'll get better once I'm less stressed, once I find myself, once you prove your loyalty. That's emotional debt. You keep paying in patience, attention, forgiveness, waiting for a version of them that never arrives. The future us becomes the carrot that keeps you walking through the desert. And then there's the education trap, the most powerful version of the investment illusion. You're told, take on the loan, it's an investment in yourself. But many of these for-profit institutions don't sell education. They sell hope. Hope at 8% interest. Their marketing preys on the fear of stagnation, of being left behind. They promise transformation but deliver degrees that don't convert into jobs. You walk across the graduation stage, diploma in hand, only to step into the same financial hole you thought you were escaping. And still, they call it an investment. Behind all these facades lies the same psychological mechanism, deferred benefit justifying immediate cost. It manipulates the brain's tendency toward temporal discounting, the belief that tomorrow's payoff will make today's suffering worthwhile. But most of these structures don't build futures. They feed on them. You pay now, with your time, your energy, your trust, while the promised reward stays suspended in the horizon. The truth is, legitimate investments have timelines. They show you the road, not just the dream. But illusions? They just keep saying, soon. Trick 42. The exposure economy. We can't pay you, but think of the exposure. That's the anthem of the modern exploitation machine. This is the exposure economy, where creators, freelancers, and young professionals are convinced that visibility is a form of currency. You can't eat it. You can't pay rent with it. But the world keeps pretending it's worth something. It happens everywhere in creative work. A photographer is asked to shoot an event for experience. A writer is invited to contribute for the platform. A designer is told, "We don't have the budget, but your work will get seen." The unspoken message: your labor is valuable, just not valuable enough to pay for. In the exposure economy, intangible benefit is valued higher than tangible effort. It preys on those still building their names, early career artists, freelancers, and anyone desperate for a break. They dangle visibility like bait, convincing you that attention is a substitute for income. But exposure only benefits the person already visible. The influencer who wants your free product doesn't grow you. They grow their content. The company that wants your free design doesn't elevate your career. They just reduce their costs. And yet, it sounds seductive. We live in a culture that worships attention, where being seen feels like existing. So we rationalize unpaid labor as strategic. We tell ourselves it's a foot in the door. But often, it's just another way of keeping the door closed, using your hunger as their leverage. Even professional industries play this game. A conference organizer invites you to speak, no honorarium, but they promise visibility. Meanwhile, the audience paid hundreds for tickets. You give knowledge. They get revenue. You get applause. The exposure economy runs on a subtle psychological bias, the overvaluation of symbolic reward. Humans are wired to chase social proof, validation, recognition, reputation. But when that desire is exploited, it becomes a leash. The irony? The very people who say we can't pay somehow always find money for advertising, logistics, and executives. But not for you. The rule is simple. If your work has value to them, it should be compensated by them. Because exposure doesn't keep the lights on. It just keeps you visible long enough for someone else to profit. Trick 43, the passion discount. Do what you love, they said. But they forgot to mention the hidden clause. Do what you love for less. Welcome to the passion discount, where enthusiasm becomes a weapon used against you. Here, your love for the work becomes the excuse to underpay you, overwork you, or guilt you into silence. Because you're lucky to be doing what you love. Take the nonprofit sector. People join driven by compassion, to help, to serve, to make an impact. But the same organizations that rely on moral missions often justify poverty wages with emotional rhetoric. We know it's not much, but you're making a difference. As if idealism can pay medical bills. Then there's teaching, one of the most emotionally demanding professions on earth. But society frames it as a calling, not a career. So when teachers demand fair pay, they're told, you don't do this for the money. That's not respect, that's manipulation. And what about dream industries? Gaming, music, film, entertainment? Thousands of young people line up for jobs that sound magical. The companies know this. They weaponize that dream. So many people would kill for this job. They say, implying your suffering is a privilege. It's a clever trick. Turn scarcity into a justification for exploitation. The startup world takes this to another level. Founders tell employees, we can't pay market salary now, but once we take off, you'll own a piece of the revolution. They paint visions of billion-dollar exits, while you're burning out for equity that may never exist. All of this relies on a simple psychological switch, turning intrinsic motivation into a substitute for compensation. The more you care, the less they think they need to pay. The more you believe in the mission, the more they extract without guilt. But passion should amplify value, not erase it. Loving your work doesn't make your time less valuable. It makes it more so. The cruel paradox of the passion discount is that it preys on the best parts of human nature. Our desire to contribute, to express, to believe in meaning. It turns fulfillment into currency and purpose into leverage. The deeper truth? The more your work is tied to identity, the easier it is to underprice your worth. Trick 44, the unlimited opportunity. Unlimited potential. Sky's the limit. Be your own boss. It sounds empowering, But what if the sky has no floor? This is the unlimited opportunity, the trick of presenting limitless potential as liberation, when in reality, it means limitless risk. Let's start with the gig economy. They tell you, work when you want. No boss. Total freedom. But behind that flexibility lies a vacuum. No healthcare, no benefits, no safety net. You're not free, you're exposed. The company doesn't pay for your time off, your injuries, your retirement, because you're not technically their employee. That's the trick. Transfer the risk to the worker, keep the reward for the platform. You carry the uncertainty so they can claim innovation. Then there's commission-only sales, unlimited earning potential. No base salary, no guarantee. Just risk wrapped in optimism. They frame insecurity as adventure, instability as opportunity. The harder you work, the more you earn, except when the market, the leads, or sheer chance decide otherwise. And it's not just jobs. This same illusion shows up in relationships. We can be anything to each other, someone says, meaning there's no definition, no boundaries, no accountability. It sounds open, but it's actually hollow. Freedom without structure is just confusion. Even the world of crypto and trading runs on this script. Sky's the limit, they say, but the unspoken part is, the floor is losing everything. Unlimited opportunity isn't freedom. It's volatility. The psychological mechanism here is risk romanticization, when people mistake uncertainty for potential. It's the ideology of modern capitalism disguised as empowerment. You become the entrepreneur of your own precarity. But true opportunity isn't infinite. It's structured. It has rules, protections, baselines. When someone says no limits, always ask, then what's stopping it from collapsing? Because without a floor, you're not standing on opportunity. You're falling through it. Trick 45, the bundled obligation. Every deal comes with fine print. Every gift has strings. The bundled obligation is the art of packaging what you want with what you never asked for. So you can't get one without swallowing the other. You've seen it everywhere. Retailers say, free gift with purchase. But the item you really want is overpriced. The gift just disguises the markup. Streaming services or software subscriptions hide essential features behind premium tiers, forcing you to pay for bundles you don't need. You're not upgrading for luxury. You're upgrading for access. In relationships, this becomes more subtle. If you want to be with me, you have to be close with my family. It sounds reasonable, but often it means inheriting obligations that aren't yours. The relationship isn't just about love anymore. It's about managing expectations, dynamics, and loyalties that came prepackaged. Workplaces use this tactic too. This job requires occasional travel. But once you're in, occasional becomes constant. What was once a side condition becomes the main event. You accepted the job, but you unknowingly signed for a lifestyle. This trick thrives on forced choice architecture, a behavioral economics tactic where desirable and undesirable options are glued together. You can't say yes to one without saying yes to both. The defense? Learn to unbundle. Ask, can we separate what's essential from what's preferred? Because bundled obligations thrive in vagueness. Clarity breaks the spell. The moment you define terms, you regain choice. Every time someone says, it's a package deal, ask yourself, who built the package and why? Trick 46, the comparative suffering. Someone always has it worse. It sounds like perspective, but it's not. It's control disguised as gratitude. Welcome to the comparative suffering, a quiet, insidious trick designed to silence legitimate pain by ranking it. You've probably heard it before. You open up about being burned out at work, and someone says, at least you have a job. You express that your relationship feels suffocating, and someone reminds you, some people are actually abused. You mention that you're anxious, exhausted, or just tired of holding it all together, and someone laughs, first world problems. At first, it sounds like they're helping you gain perspective, but that's not what's really happening. They're reframing your suffering as ingratitude. It's a psychological silencing mechanism. By comparing your pain to someone else's, they strip it of legitimacy, as if human emotion were a competition, as if empathy were a scarce resource that must be rationed. And here's the cruel logic at play. If someone else's pain is worse, yours doesn't count. So you swallow it. You minimize it. You pretend it doesn't hurt. But suffering isn't a zero-sum game. The existence of hunger in one place doesn't make your heartbreak less real. The existence of war doesn't erase your anxiety. The existence of injustice doesn't invalidate your exhaustion. Pain doesn't need to win to be valid. The comparative suffering trick thrives in environments built on hierarchy, workplaces, families, institutions, societies, where emotional suppression maintains order. It's especially common in toxic workplaces, where leaders deflect complaints by invoking worse scenarios. You think this is hard? Be grateful you're not in X department. Translation: don't question the conditions. Just endure. It also appears in relationships, subtle but sharp. When you voice a concern, the other person responds, "At least I don't hit you," or "Other people would kill to have someone like me." It's emotional gaslighting wrapped in moral superiority. In public discourse, this pattern shows up as oppression Olympics. Competing narratives of who suffers most drown out shared humanity. Pain becomes politicized, empathy becomes conditional, and dialogue collapses into comparison. Even in medicine, the trick persists. Patients are told, "Others have it worse," as though acknowledging another's pain requires diminishing your own. It creates guilt where there should be care. The underlying mechanism is hierarchical empathy, the belief that only the most extreme cases deserve attention. It's a way for systems or people in power to manage discomfort by ranking it out of existence. But empathy doesn't work like that. It's not a ladder. It's a mirror. The moment we start grading pain, we lose connection. Because real compassion doesn't say, "You shouldn't feel this." It says, "I see that you do." The trick of comparative suffering thrives because it sounds virtuous. Look how grateful I am. Look how others endure more. But gratitude and invalidation are not the same. Gratitude is healing with acknowledgement. Comparative suffering is denial through comparison. It's important to see the function of this manipulation. It prevents change. If you can be convinced your suffering is trivial, you'll never demand better. If you believe your exhaustion is nothing compared to others, you'll keep working through it. If you think your loneliness isn't worth mentioning, you'll stay silent. That's how exploitation sustains itself, by making you ashamed of calling it exploitation. The antidote is simple but powerful. Validate without hierarchy. Recognize that pain, like dignity, isn't earned through comparison. Every hurt deserves acknowledgement, not measurement. The next time someone says, "Others have it worse," respond, "And others have it better. But this is where I am." That's not self-pity. That's honesty. Because the truth is, empathy isn't about ranking suffering. It's about refusing to. And once you stop measuring your pain against the world's, you'll finally see how often the world taught you to accept too little, just because someone else accepted less.